Hi everyone, I'm going to talk to you about the Cold War, which is the new war that we enter into the moment World War II is over. The tension building up between the Soviet Union and the United States really escalates after World War II ends. So we're going to see this in a number of ways. First off, looking at the costs of World War II, the tremendous destruction that was wrought by this global conflict. Most of Europe, once again, is in ruins. Never having fully recovered from World War II. You have the victims of the Holocaust, the refugee crisis, the tremendous death toll that this war caused. All of these things contribute to a lot of instability in Europe. You also have the immediate effects. We have to deal with not Hitler himself, of course, because he is no longer alive, but the other leaders of the Nazi regime, as well as the Japanese military. What do we do with these individuals who are responsible for committing horrific war crimes? As you should know, we have the Nuremberg trials and we have the Tokyo trials, where we have the leaders of both nations stand trial for the crimes that they committed. We've entered into a nuclear age, courtesy of the United States, detonating 2 atomic bombs in Japan, and now there's this global race to develop technology that's better, more destructive. And it's a race for nations to develop their own version of nuclear warheads. You also have the creation of the United Nations. This is distinct from League of Nations because the U.S. never joined the League of Nations after World War I. We've learned our lesson. We can't be isolationist. And so after World War II, we agreed to join the United Nations, which its purpose is very similar to that of the League of Nations, to provide a forum in which national leaders can meet and discuss conflicts that they have before a violent war breaks out. We also have some long-term implications. We go from a world in which multiple powers and alliances are battling it out, the Axis powers versus the Allied powers in World War II, to now 2 national superpowers. Obviously, I'm talking about the United States versus the Soviet Union. It seems kind of strange to be talking about this, given what's going on with Putin. You have 2 different ideologies, 2 different views of how life should be. You have the Soviet Union, of course, and the Eastern Bloc, and how they view things as they should be. And it's very different from how Western democracies, including the United States, view the ideal form of government and economy. So first off, the goal of the Soviet Union is to spread this communist mentality, this communist ideal that was created by Karl Marx, to spread it around the world. They want a communist economy. The United States, of course, is very much in favor of capitalism, free market trade, privately owned businesses. They see communism as an imminent threat to their economy. And so the goal of the United States and Western Europe is to stop the spread of communism. This was a mentality created by George Kennan. Their methodology is, how are we going to do this? So they're going to compete with each other for winning friends. And they're going to go to third world countries to try and buy friends with money that they're willing to offer these countries to help rebuild after World War II. They're also going to use these third world countries for fighting in proxy wars, which instead of the United States and the Soviet Union directly engaging each other in conflict, they're going to provide weapons and maybe at times soldiers to fight out battles in other nations. Vietnam and Korea are the most obvious examples of communism and capitalism battling it out. We also have an arms race where both the Soviet Union and the United States are rivaling each other for who can accumulate the most nuclear warheads. The idea being that if we have more warheads than the Soviet Union, they won't seek a violent conflict with us. So it's always this race to have more weapons than your enemy. And then, of course, we have spying, we have espionage. We have the CIA in the United States that goes into the Soviet Union undercover and has a lot of contacts within the Russian government to get some of the secret information, confidential, high-level information that they can about the Soviet Union. Likewise, Russian officials, Soviet officials have KGB operatives, of which Vladimir Putin was one of them, to conduct spying missions on Western Europe and the United States. And both groups join alliances. The United States becomes part of NATO, which still exists today, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's the assembly of all of the democratic capitalist countries in the world that align themselves with the United States. And then, of course, the Soviet Union has the opposite, which is called the Warsaw Pact, which named after a city in Poland. The Warsaw Pact are Eastern European nations that align themselves with the Soviet Union and communism. So as I said before, George Kennan came out with this idea of containment. He didn't see us as being able to completely eradicate this idea of communism, but he thought that maybe we could create a circumstance in which people would be less likely to turn to communism as an answer. I'll tell you more about that. Communism as a concept, this equal distribution of wealth for everyone, businesses owned and operated by the government of a nation, there are no social classes. This whole concept is most attractive to people who are poor, people who are unemployed. And it's attractive to nations that are in ruins with an economy that is not functioning. So that being said, after World War II is over, there are a lot of countries that are in ruins and an economy that are in shambles. So the issue for us is, how do we discourage countries like Greece, Turkeys that have been ruined by World War II and have to rebuild? How do we discourage them from turning to communism as an easy answer, since there are a lot of unemployed, poor people living in the country? And for us, the answer was really money and military support. So first off, President Truman is president after FDR dies in office. He's reelected actually in 1948, so he continues to serve 1945 through 1952. I had to do some simple math there. And he sets out with the Truman Doctrine, which provides military support to nations that are fighting against communism. More specifically, Truman's Doctrine offers weapons and financial support to Greece and Turkey. $400 million in military and economic aid to Greece and Turkey to help both Greece and Turkey fight against the rise of communism within their countries. Strategically or geopolitically, these two countries are important because we can't lose Greece and Turkey to the Soviet Union. And they're right on the edge. I mean, the Soviet Union is just above them. We want to make sure we can keep communism from spreading into both Greece and Turkey. Similarly, in Western Europe, definitely a region of the continent that's been devastated by World War I and II, it's important that we give them some money as well to help them rebuild. So $13 billion we give in the form of the Marshall Plan to Western Europe to help them rebuild. And the goal here is that's enough to get their economy going again, get people employed, and make communism a less attractive idea. There are a lot of different reasons for why the Soviets don't trust us. They feel like we were not quick enough to help them during World War II, especially when they were battling it out with Hitler. They don't trust us because we kept the atomic bomb development and Manhattan Project secret from them. They don't trust us because we formed NATO. There are a lot of different aspects of this that really play into this tension between the Soviet Union and the United States. Similarly, the United States doesn't trust the Soviets. If you remember, they stabbed us in the back by signing the Non-Aggression Pact with Germany. They were supposed to be on the side of the Allies and behind the scenes signed this pact. Of course, they paid dearly for that. There are efforts to expand communism throughout the world, and a lot of the things that they've done in Eastern Europe. As the Soviet Union claimed most of Eastern Europe after World War II, they denied democratic elections in Eastern European countries. Although they had promised that they would allow for democracy, they didn't actually deliver on that promise. And the Berlin blockade, which you will read about in your next chapter. So this division between East and West, between Soviet Union and the United States, between communism and capitalism, it plays out in a lot of different ways, but some other things that are developing as part of that tension is the simple fact that all of China becomes communist in 1949. All of China becomes communist in 1949. So that's a massive country that became communist. It terrifies the United States. In the same year, not only does China become communist under Mao Zedong, but the Soviet Union detonates their first atomic bomb. Well, now we've got a lot to worry about. So you have the expansion of communism into Eastern Europe, into China, and other countries that are going to fall to communism as well, including Cuba over here, right at our back door. Post-war division of Germany. Because the Allied powers win World War II, and this includes the Soviet Union, we divide up Germany and we rebuild our own little sector. As you can see, Great Britain took the northwest section of Germany and rebuilt it. So our sister school was rebuilt in large part by the British soldiers that went in. France took the area closest to it. We took Bavaria, the region of Bavaria, and rebuilt this whole region following World War II. And the Soviet Union, of course, took the section that's closest to them in Eastern Europe. Berlin is in the middle of it. But Berlin, the city, is then divided into 4 sectors. Great Britain gets a couple of neighborhoods, France gets a few neighborhoods, the United States gets a few neighborhoods, and the Soviet Union gets a few neighborhoods. So what you have here within the city of Berlin are Americans that are living in an island, basically, within Eastern Europe. And you can see that here. And one of the things that happens is Stalin blocks our access to Berlin. So we have Americans that are living there, but they're unable to get the support. They're unable to get the medical, the food, the supplies that they need to continue living in Berlin because Stalin creates a blockade. And we can't get on the roads. We can't take the railroad. We can't access Berlin. We can't resupply our friends in Berlin. So what do? The airlift. We airlift supplies into Berlin. We drop them from planes, and we do this for several months so that we can keep our section of Berlin regardless of the blockade. And we successfully pull it off. Stalin finally relents and gives up and reopens access to Berlin. You also have the development of these 2 warring alliances, NATO and the Warsaw Pact. And Truman responds to the development of the atomic bomb by Russia by creating the Atomic Energy Commission in 1949. He wants to create a hydrogen bomb. Now, a hydrogen bomb would be 150 times more powerful than the weapons we used on Japan. So we step up our development of bigger, more destructive weapons. We also implement NSC 68. NSC stands for the National Security Council, and this is the most significant investment of U.S. dollars in the military thus far in U.S. history. We are technically at peace, but it doesn't mean that we stop investing in the military because what we fear is the outbreak of a nuclear war. The NSC 68 not only increases our investment in the military by 4 times as much money, it also creates the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. Shortly after Soviet Union detonates their bomb and China falls to communism, North Korea, which is communist, invades South Korea. So this starts in 1950, and the communists in North Korea want to take the rest of the peninsula. We're not going to allow it because remember our policy is containment. So we send U.S. forces into South Korea, and we fight from 1950 to 1953 before reestablishing the 38th parallel generally. So you can see the truce line up here. We reestablished essentially the same border that existed previous to the outbreak of this Korean conflict. We just come to some agreement that the South will continue to stay capitalist and controlled in large part by the United States, guided by the U.S., and the North Korea will continue to stay communist. And from this point on, we have a DMZ, the demilitarized zone, separating North and South Korea, and it still exists today. The fear that we have is something called the domino theory. We think if China has now become communist, that if Korea is allowed to become communist, then all the other countries in Asia will become communist. So we can't allow even one victory. So we're going to invest a lot of time, soldiers, military equipment to hold on to that land so we can continue to ensure that South Korea remains capitalist.